Living with Art, 13th edition, Part 3, Chapter 8, Prints. Chapter outline: relief, intaglio, lithography, screen printing, monotype and monoprint, digital, recent directions, printing on the world. Relief: prints made by using the relief process, removal of all material from the matrix except the image to be printed. The term relief describes any printing method in which the image to be printed is raised from the background. Think of a rubber stamp. When you look at the stamp itself, you may see the words such as special delivery standing out from the background in reverse. You press the stamp to an ink pad, then to paper, and the words print right side out, a mirror image of the stamp. All relief processes work according to this general principle, as seen in this illustration of the basic processes used to make prints. The top diagram illustrates relief printing. Notice how the ink rests on the raised part of the matrix. The ink is not in the recessed areas. Any surface from which the background areas can be carved away is suitable for relief printing. You may have made a relief print from a potato or an apple when you were a child. For artists, the material most commonly associated with relief printing is wood. Relief: the invention of movable type and the printing press increased the demand for woodcuts to disseminate information. To make a woodcut, the artist first draws the desired image on a block of wood. Then all the areas that are not meant to print are cut and gouged out of the wood so that the image stands out in relief. When the block is inked, only the raised areas take the ink. Finally, the block is pressed on paper, or paper is placed on the block and rubbed to transfer the ink and make the print. The earliest surviving woodcut image was made in China, dated 868 CE. This portrayal of the Buddha preaching appears at the beginning of the world's earliest known printed book, a copy of the Diamond Sutra, an important Buddhist text. The image probably reproduces an original drawing in brush and ink, executed in the slender, even-width lines that Chinese writers likened to iron wire. Although only one copy survives, the edition of the sutra must have been quite a large for a postscript, and at the end of the 18-foot long scroll tells us that the project was undertaken at the expense of Wang Jai for universal free distribution. Two great Chinese inventions, paper and printing, are combined here. Relief: woodcut and linocut have few details. With the introduction of engraving and other printmaking techniques discussed later in this chapter, woodcut gradually fell out of favor with European artists. Compared with these later techniques, it seemed coarse and unrefined. Those very qualities drew artists to woodcut again in the early 20th century, when many rejected refinement in favor of bolder, starker, more urgent messages like The Widow No. 2 by Kathy Kollwitz. A woman lies dead on the ground with her child's body across her chest. The image is stark, and Kollwitz used the black ink in the white page to create a dramatic chiaroscuro. She also revealed the process of making a woodcut. The traces of the cutaway portions of the block are visible below the figure. They represent the energy of the cutting and the gouging that cleared this area away. The Widow No. 2 from this portfolio of 7 prints called War, created in the aftermath of World War I. The prints and their jagged points and lines evoke the trauma of the war from the perspective of those left behind, who were mainly women. A linoleum cut, or lino cut, is very similar to a woodcut. Linoleum, however, is much softer than wood. The relative softness makes linoleum easier to cut, but it also limits the number of crisp impressions that can be produced. Since the block wears down more quickly during printmaking, linoleum has no grain, so it is possible to make cuts in any directions with equal ease. Artist Santili Goji made his lino cut Meeting of Two Cultures at a transformative moment in South African history. Apartheid, the system of segregation that gave white Southern Africans rights and opportunities not permitted of the black citizens, had ended, and freedom fighter Nelson Mandela was about to be elected president. Goji represented this historical moment as two houses coming together and shaking hands. To the left side, the traditional South African house strides forward on black legs. It grasped the white hand of the Western brick house, wearing a dress, pants, and loafers. For Goji, the houses coming together represented a new hope for his nation. Relief. Color woodcut uses multiple blocks. By the 14th century, China had advanced to the next step in woodcut by using multiple blocks to print images in full colors. A few centuries later, this technique was transmitted to Japan, where during the 18th century it was brought to a level of perfection that would make Japanese prints famous the world over. Produced by the thousands and cheaply sold, woodblock prints in Japan were a popular art even if they never enjoyed the prestige of painting. Utagawa Kansuta's Artisan's print is a fanciful depiction of how Japanese woodcut prints were made. In the background, a woman in black in a black robe carves one of the blocks using a mallet and chisel. A smaller chisel rests nearby for finer cutting. To the right, another woman pierces a piece of paper to transfer a drawing to the block before cutting. The colors available for printing images are seen on the left. The woman in the center foreground prepares the paper to receive the ink transferred from the matrix. Printed papers hang from the rafters to dry. While this woodcut pictures a printmaking shop in operation, it is a fanciful depiction for having women do the work and for the large size of the printed images it depicts. Artisans, for example, is just barely larger than a sheet of notebook paper. Relief. Wood engraving allows for finer detail. Like a woodcut, a wood engraving uses a block of wood as a matrix. But whereas a woodcut matrix is created on the surface cut along the grain, a wood engraving matrix is created on the surface cut across the grain and in-grain block. If you imagine a piece of lumber, say a 1 foot length by a 2 by 4, then a woodcut would use one of the 4 by 12 inch sides, whereas the wood engraving would use only one of the 2 by 4 inch cut ends. Sanded to a mere smoothness and worked with finely pointed tools, the end grain block can be cut with equal ease in any direction and lends itself well to detail. Wood engraving was popular for illustrating printed magazines and books in the 19th century. Its small blocks could be printed alongside movable type, both letters and images cut to the same height. Art students and copyists in the Louvre Gallery in Paris, as we see here, appeared in the 1868 issue of Harper's Weekly. Wood engravers producing photographs, witnessed sketches, and artist drawing accompanying news items and short stories in this popular magazine. Winslow Homer drew his image, which a professional wood engraver reproduced for a short article on the history of the Louvre Museum and its collections. Intaglio. Prints made using the intaglio process cut the design to be printed into the matrix. Engraving is the oldest of the intaglio techniques. Engraving developed from the medieval practice of incising, or cutting, linear designs in armor and other metal surfaces. The armorer's art had achieved a high level of expertise, and it was just a short step to realizing that the engraved lines could be filled with ink and a design from the matrix impressed onto the paper. The basic tool of engraving is the burin, a sharp V-shaped instrument used to cut lines into the metal plate. Shallow cuts produce a light, thin line. Deeper gouges in the metal result in a thicker and darker line. Engraving is closely related to drawing in pen and ink, in both technique and the visual effect of the work. Looking at a reproduction, it is hard to tell an engraving from a fine pen drawing. In both media, modeling and shading effects are usually achieved by hatching, cross-hatching, or stippling. Intaglio. Engraving uses a burin to cut lines in a plate and permits small details and modeling with light and shadow. One of the greatest Renaissance printmakers was Albrecht Dürer. Although he considered himself primarily a painter, it was prints that brought Dürer to the greatest renown. They also brought him steady income. Toward the end of his life, he noted that he would have made more money if he had stuck to engravings. In 1513 and 1514, Dürer created 3 prints, so technically and artistically sophisticated that they have become known as the master engravings. One of these is Night, Death, and the Devil, as seen here. Intaglio. Dry point scratches a design into the plate. Dry point is similar to engraving, except that the cutting instrument used is a dry point needle. The artist draws on the matrix, usually a copper plate, almost as freely as one can draw on a paper with a pencil. As the needle scratches across the plate, it raises a burr, or a thin ridge of metal. If left in place, the burr will hold ink along with the incised line, producing a soft, slightly blurred line when printed. The burr can also be scraped away, in which case the incised line only will hold ink, producing a fine, delicate line. Because intaglio prints are made by using a roller press that exerts great pressure, dry point burrs are quickly worn down. This means that only a few good copies can be made. As we see the difference between the scraped and unscraped dry point lines in Mary Cassatt's The Caress, notice how some of the lines seem to have indistinct edges and velvety appearance, such as along the child's arm or in the mother's hair. These lines have not had their burr removed. The scraped lines are crisper, with edges that are easier to distinguish. Dry point's scratchy quality and the subtle value variations possible with this intaglio process are visible in the fingers, the hair, and in the soft modeling of their faces. Intaglio. Mezzopoint puts circular indentations into the plate with a rocker, with areas not intended to print smoothed with a burnisher. Mezzotint puts circular indentations into the plate with a rocker, with areas not intended to print smoothed with a burnisher. The grainy appearance of Charles Wilson Peele's Benjamin Franklin portrait is the result of mezzotint's roughening and smoothing process. All the tiny dots visible in the print correspond to where the artist roughened the plate. The lighter areas of the jacket reveal where Peele smoothed down the burr and the pits in the dark coat to create the illusion of mass. The dark areas at the top right of the shoulder, under the hair, and on the back of the head, where the artist left the roughened plate alone to create shadows. While Peele created the portrait of this famous figure in U.S. history in mezzotint, he used an engraver to burn and cut the letters in the frame. Intaglio. Etching uses acid to eat lines into the plate and freer movement of the artist's hand than engraving or woodcut. Etching uses acid to eat lines into the plate and freer movement of the artist's hand than engraving and woodcut. Rembrandt van Rijn, who was a prolific printmaker, made hundreds of etchings. Unfortunately, many of his plates were not canceled or destroyed. Long after his death, and long after the plates had worn down badly, people looking to produce more Rembrandts struck impressions from the plates. These later impressions lack the detail and give us little idea of what the artist intended. To get a true sense of Rembrandt's genius as an etcher, we must look at prints that are known to be early impressions, such as the Christ preaching plate that we see here. Using only line, Rembrandt gives us a world made of light and shadow. He has set his scene in a humble quarter of town, possibly modeled on the Jewish section of Amsterdam, which he knew well. Barefoot and bathed in sunlight, Christ preaches to the small but curious crowd that has gathered. His attention falls for a moment on the little boy in the foreground, who is doodling with his finger in the dust. Rembrandt's greatness lie in part in his ability to imagine and portray such profoundly human moments. Intaglio. Aquatint spread particles of acid-resistant powder on the surface of the plate before submersion in acid. Aquatint spread particles of acid-resistant powder on the surface of the plate before submersion in acid. The Spanish artist Francisco de Goya used aquatint for his satirical print, and so he was his grandfather. Goya depicted an ass proudly displaying his family genealogy. It's clear that he comes from a long line of asses. Goya's immediate target was the Spanish aristocracy of his day, which inherited power and privilege because of noble pedigrees that went back for centuries. The areas that appear lightest on the sleeve, pants, and the page have been protected from the acid. The areas that are the darkest, such as the figure's back and ears, have spent the longest time in the acid. The graininess of the distinct tonal areas is typical of aquatint and shows the location of the resin grains. Lithography. Lithographs print from the surface of the matrix, relying on the principle that oil and water do not mix. Lithography, as a printmaking process, is much like drawing, allowing artists great freedom and is quick to produce. Nadar Elevating Photography to the Heights of Art is the title of this lithograph, which was made for a French newspaper. It pokes fun at a particular photographer named Jasper Felix Tournanchon, who went by the nickname Nadar. Photography was invented in the late 1830s and quickly gained popularity, especially among the middle class, that had portraits taken at the photography studios that Demers shows covering the city of Paris. Nadar owned one of these studios, but also experimented with aerial photography. Some artists, however, were skeptical about the merits of the new mechanical image-making process, believing that the camera did all of the work. Demers played with this distinction between high and lowbrow art in this lithograph, comparing Nadar's physical elevation to the social and professional elevation he sought for in his art. Color lithographs can be made by using one stone per color. To ensure correct registration, an outline of the image is first transferred to each stone using a non-greasy substance that will not print. The stones are then worked and prepared following the regular process. Other color lithographs are done with just one stone. Ruth Asawa used a single matrix for Desert Flower. The branches that spread radially from the center in beige and black are printed from a single stone. The artist first inked and printed the image in black. She then turned the stone 90 degrees and printed it in beige ink, overlapping the black ink to create a dense network of lines. Lithography. Color lithographs use a separate matrix for each color. While printmakers are sometimes fully responsible for their lithographs, from concept to printing, Asawa created her print during her residency at Tamarind Professional Fine Art Press. Founded by artist June Wayne in 1960, Tamarind's mission was, and still remains, to promote creative lithography in the United States, inviting artists to make prints at the press. Asawa, a sculptor known for her non-representational forms in wire, was invited to Tamarind in 1965. There she collaborated with a master printer, an expert on the materials and processes on lithography. She drew Desert Flower on the stone and then worked with the master printer to bring her vision to colorful life in an edition of 10 lithographs, one of the 52 prints she made while at Tamarind. Screen printing. Screen printing uses screen stencils as the matrix. Color screen prints use a separate matrix for each color. To make his color screen print interior morning, Patrick Caulfield prepared one screen for each color. The preparation of multiple color screens is relatively easy and inexpensive. For that reason, it is not unusual to see serigraphs printed in 10, 20, or more colors, although Caulfield used only 3. On one screen, for example, he stopped out all the areas not meant to print in black, and so on for the other colors. To align his color screen print correctly, Caulfield carefully registered the screen on the paper to keep the colors from overlapping. Monotype and monoprint. A monotype is a singular image that transfers a design from a matrix only once but offers the greatest freedom without the constraint of a matrix. The earliest artist known to create monotypes in Western art was Giovanni Benedetto Calistoni. To create Creation of Adam, Calistoni applied a thick layer of black ink to a copper plate, covering it completely. He then used a reductive technique, scraping away the ink to create lines and areas of light. He removed the most ink from Adam's body, meant to be seen as if highlighted. He removed the least on the upper left and bottom right, only scratching fine lines to suggest the landscape. Looking at the figure of Adam, we can tell that Calistoni removed the ink in layers, with a first pass leaving some ink behind for a second pass with a different tool to remove completely. Once he removed all of the ink he needed to define his figures and setting, Calistoni rolled the plate and a sheet of paper through an intaglio press, transferring the ink and rendering the matrix unusable. To make another image, Calistoni needed to start the process over again. Monotype and monoprint. Monoprint is a singular image created with a matrix that has been permanently altered. Monoprint is a singular image created with a matrix that has been permanently altered. Monotype is easy to confuse with monoprint, a printmaking process that similarly results in a unique impression. The difference between the two lies with the matrix. In monotype, the matrix is not permanently marked. Nothing has been cut or etched into the surface. A monoprint, like The God Judging Adam by William Blake, begins with a permanently altered matrix, in this case a relief etching, in which the design was drawn in acid-resistant ground before the copper plate was submerged in acid. The acid ate away everything but the drawing of Adam standing ashamed before God and his chariot. Blake then inked the plate in different ways each time he printed it. After printing, Blake drew in the ink on printed paper and painted it with watercolor, making each impression unique. Digital. Digital prints have no matrix and are produced with a high-quality printer in 4 color dots. Digital prints have no matrix and are produced with a high-quality printer in 4 color dots. If digital prints sound like the digital paintings we discussed in previous chapters, this is because the two mediums have a lot in common. Like the Petra copyright, the American artist Kiki Smith generated the initial composition for her print Untitled, Nest-Trees, on a computer. She began with photographs of the canopy of a tree with a nest. Using imaging software, she manipulated the photographs, turning them at different angles and assembling them in mosaic views. Because we never see the whole tree, just parts of the canopy from different vantage points and distances, the visual effect is abstract and patterned. The organic meandering lines of the branches seem to rest on the surface of the image. Once Smith was satisfied with the appearance of her digitally manipulated photograph, she used an inkjet printer to create an edition of 20 black and white prints. But the digital presence in printmaking is not restricted to image manipulation and printing. Some artists have used computer-controlled cutting devices to create matrices that that are inked and printing using traditional techniques. Others create designs on computer or tablet or combine existing hand-drawn and photographic images for printing using inkjet technology. Still other digital prints live entirely on a computer screen, never becoming a physical object. Recent directions. Contemporary printmakers have explored three-dimensionality. Contemporary printmakers have explored three-dimensionality. John Hitchcock has a long history of experimenting with prints in 3 dimensions. One project covered the floor and walls of a gallery in prints of tanks and helicopters. Another screen printed on synthetic fabric and stretched prints over wood frames to recall indigenous dwellings. In National Sanctuary, Hitchcock screen printed on a Naombe hide cut in the shape of a buffalo hide and paper folded onto the shape of skulls. He installed these in the shape of a tornado, seemingly under siege by attacking helicopters. The screen printing process provided boldly graphic imagery with flat uniform areas of color. The screens bearing the images of birds, lines, and the letter X were used repeatedly on the hides and on the skulls. Recent directions. Contemporary printmakers have brought prints outside. With Caledonia curry, or better known as swoon, prints moved to outdoor walls. Swoon makes large lino cuts and wood cuts on lightweight paper, cuts the images free from the ground, then pastes them up on urban walls and barriers. For me, pasting is about many things, she says, and one of them is about declaring the walls of the city a public sounding board for our dreams, desires, and collective identity. I see these walls as a ground level, reachable, and seeable by the masses bulletin board for a million voices needing outlets, and I am one of them. This concludes Chapter 8.